We're continuing our study through the book of Esther, and so let's turn there together. Esther chapter 5 today, and if you have a Bible, if you don't, there might be one there in front of you. I'll have most of the words up on the screen for us. Hopefully you got a note sheet as you came in, but we're going to dive right into it today because we're going to cover a lot of ground, and I'm going to try to not be as long as last week. How many of you remember that one? Okay, all right, nobody, great. All right, well, then we are all in. That means I can extend it even a little bit more, and that's great. Well, we're in Esther, and where we left off last week, chapter 4, as we completed chapter 4, we left off at a place where the story had certainly reached a moment of noticeable tension and danger. If you can remember back to me, with me to chapter number 4. If you'll remember, there had been a decree that had been put out in the Medo-Persian Empire by King Xerxes, known as Ahasuerus. We read about that name used, that Persian name that's used in this passage. But the decree had been put out to exterminate every single Jew in the 127 provinces that were underneath his reign. Now, that whole situation to purge the land, to purge the empire of the Jews, was brought about by a man by the name of Haman. And Haman was someone who was well known in the government. He had a position of authority. And through his hatred of a man named Mordecai, he came up with this idea that we need to just exterminate all Jews. Now, within all of this man Mordecai, who was sort of the catalyst for the extermination, he had an adopted daughter. It was actually his cousin, a lady by the name of Esther. Now, Esther, of course, the book is named after her. And through a series of what we could only describe as God moments, she found herself in a beauty pageant, I guess if we were to describe it, a beauty pageant that led to her becoming the queen. So she is now the queen. King Ahasuerus, King Xerxes is known in history. She is the queen, and then it is her cousin who is her stepfather. You got it? Anybody else have confusing family lines? You're trying to connect the dots. Who is her cousin, who is her stepfather. He is the one who has this target on his back. Of course, she's a Jew as well. And so the whole story is played out where she is also in danger. So last week in chapter 4, what happened is that Mordecai finally went to Esther. He told her through a series of conversations back and forth with other people. He told her what the danger was. He told her that her life was in danger. And he implores her, he encourages her very strongly, you need to say something. And perhaps, he says that famous line in chapter 4, verse 4, and he says, perhaps you have been placed here for such a time as this. For such a time as this. And at first she doesn't receive it very well, right? She goes back and says, I don't know, my life would be in danger if I was to speak up. I mean, it's over for me, and I can't go in to see the king. I can't approach him without being summoned. But after some further conversation, we ended the chapter last week where she says to Mordecai, I want you to gather all the Jews in Shushan. I want you to fast and, of course, by implication, pray for 3 days. And then she says this, at the end of that 3 days, I am going to go approach the king. And then she says, and if I perish, what does she say? I perish. If I perish, I perish. So we set the scene for this morning where Esther knows what she's about to step into. She knows that her very life is in danger, but yet she's determined now to do the right thing. No matter what the circumstances are, no matter what the consequences, she says, I believe, I know that God has me here for a reason, and so I'm going to follow through and I'm going to do what I am supposed to do. And this is where we pick up this morning in chapter 5, where we see Esther's courage. Esther's courage. Look at me at verse number 1. Now it came to pass on the third day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house. And so we're given a bit of a description as to the setting that they are in. But after the 3 days of fasting and prayer, Esther follows through. She prepares the best that she possibly can. She dresses herself in her royal clothing, indicating, of course, her position. As well, it was a way for her to show honor to the king. And she goes and she stands in this court. She doesn't make a big deal out of it. She just simply goes and she stands there. She was showing deference in her demeanor. She was showing humility in her approach. But the thing that I want to notice here more than anything else is that more than her outward preparation, this was a woman who had some inward preparation before this moment. I mean, her life is at risk. The king, simply by ignoring her, would end her life, or he could say, remove her, which meant immediately off with her head is what it meant. She was facing mortal danger, yet she was inwardly prepared and ready to accept whatever the consequences would be. She was ready, I believe, with a quiet strength. And I believe the reason for that is because she had fasted for 3 days and she'd been praying for 3 days. She was ready and confident that God would work out something good in all of this. You know, I think it's an important point for us this morning to recognize that before we head into any major decisions, before we head into big changes in our life, before we step out even in faith in something that God wants us to do, it is important that we prepare the heart first. How many of you ever done something without praying about it? Oh, okay. Have you ever noticed how that goes, right? I could take a few minutes and share a few of those with you today. But listen, one of the things we can learn from this just really right at the very beginning of the outset of the message here is that before we step into something, it is important that we prepare our hearts, that we take the time to, it may mean fasting, but most certainly it means prayer. And saying, Lord, help me to be prepared for this moment. Help me to follow through. Help me to have faith. Because honestly, a lot of us find ourselves in positions like Esther where God has maybe showed us what we're to do. God has told us, this is where I need you to be. This is a decision I want you to make. This is a sin I need you to set aside. But yet when it comes right up to it, we fail in that decision. And oftentimes it's because we just simply have not done the internal work. We have not prepared the heart as we should. I was blessed to be a youth pastor for 9 years, and I've helped to run camp ministries for almost 20 years at this point of my life. And one of the things that is a constant in camp ministry and youth ministry is teenagers standing in front of a group of their peers and saying, God has convicted me about this, and this is a decision that I'm going to make. And then on the bus ride home, they break that decision. Some of you know what I'm talking about. And then the next year they come back and they stand and they make that same decision, and God has done that, and then they struggle in it again. Now listen, we're all human and we fail and we fall, certainly. But oftentimes what happens is God speaks to us, he challenges us, and we just, without preparation, just sort of head into it, and then we struggle. We wonder why we struggle. This is a great testimony here of someone who set aside time. She asked others to pray for her, and she says, I'm going to be prepared inwardly before I step into this situation. And I think that's something that we can all be reminded of and be encouraged with. You may be facing something at work right now. You may be facing a family situation, something that you need to do, and you know you need to do it, and you're afraid of it. It may be something that God has led you to do. Whether it's just stepping out and serving him, whether it's serving here at the church or giving, or some way that God is encouraging you. Maybe it's to witness to a friend, and you know God wants you to do it, but you're on the edge of not following through. I want to encourage you, set aside some time. Say, you know what, I'm going to pray about this for a day. I'm going to pray about this for a week. And I'm going to say, God, would you prepare me inwardly to obey you and to follow you? Because that's really ultimately what it comes down to. Esther was faced with a question of, will you obey? And will you follow what God has set up for you? And thankfully, what we see here is that she does this. Now, there is much to read between the lines of verse number 1. And I know you're concerned already. We're just on one verse. We'll keep moving in a moment. But there's much to read in between the lines here as Esther, and I want you to picture yourself in the moment where she enters in unannounced into the court of the king. Notice she did not draw attention to herself. She did not walk in and be like, the queen is here, right? She didn't, spray paint some protest on the wall. She didn't sit down and I'm not moving until King Ahasuerus listens to me. Or she did not make a big deal out of it. She simply walked in. She was prepared. She was confident. She was ready. Now listen, she was scared for sure. She was nervous. I know that she was, but she confidently stood, showing great composure and great strength. And then as God always does when we obey him, when we follow his leading, when we pursue life as God is leading us to, God shows up and reminds every one of us that he is in control. Look at verse number 2. And it was so when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto her, what do you desire, Queen Esther? And what is your request? And then he says this phrase here, it shall, whatever you ask, it shall be given to you, even to half of the kingdom. Now, talk about a turn of events, right? We entered this morning's message nervous, like our knees shaking, like what's going to happen to Esther? And just like this, she's standing before the king. He extended the golden scepter, which was his way of accepting somebody. He would point it towards you, and you're like, okay, good, I can breathe now. And you go, and she touched it as a way of showing like gratefulness. And then he says to her, my queen. I don't know if he said it like that or not, but what can I do for you? What? I will give you whatever you want. And then he says that phrase, like I mentioned, up to half of the kingdom. And just in case you get excited there, because all of us immediately, our minds go there like, I will take half then, This was something that leaders in ancient world often would use. It was an expression, but it was not to be taken literally, okay? Some of you might remember in the New Testament, in 2 of the 4 Gospels, we're told the story of King Herod and his wicked wife, Herodias. Remember that? And she sent her daughter in to dance seductively before her husband. And because he was pleased by it, he said, I'll give you whatever you want, up to half of my kingdom. This was of course, years later, and then, of course, she asked for the head of John the Baptist, right? And that didn't go very well for John the Baptist in that moment. But there was a phrase that's constantly used, that is used multiple times. But as I mentioned, it's not to be taken literally. Just like when you have friends over to your house, right? And they're like, hey, can I have a drink or a water or something, And you're like, mi casa, su casa. You ever say that? Some of you don't know what that even means, all right? I say it and I don't even know what it means. No, it means like, my house is your house. Or we would say, hey, make yourself at home. Now, when you say that to somebody, they're not like immediately calling U-Haul, right? And like, is it okay if we take the bottom 2 bedrooms, and hey, we're moving in, or they go and take a nap in your bed, of course not. We understand it's a phrase we're saying like, hey, like make yourself at home. And so that's what he's saying here. Like, I'll give you whatever, up to half of my kingdom. He's being very kind and very generous here. But it's amazing to think that Esther went from fearing for her life to having the ear and the favor of the king. And it's a miracle. But isn't that like our God, right? He's a God of miracles. He does things. He works things out in ways that we would never expect. And he specializes in turning our fears to faith through his actions. And so now Esther here has the attention of the king. He says, man, you're looking good today. I'll give you whatever it is that you want. You have my favor. What is she going to do? Now's her chance, right? She can plead the cause of her people in this moment. But let's see what she says in verse number 4. And Esther answered, if it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman. Okay, now Haman is brought right back into this thing. I was hoping we were done with him, but no, here he is. Let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, cause Haman to make haste. Hurry up, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. Now, hold up. What is going on here? I mean, we've been waiting. She has this opportunity before the king. He says, ask whatever. Why isn't she just like, hey, I need you to change the rules. I need to change that law. The Jews are supposed to be killed. I'm Jew. Please stop this. But she doesn't do that. She invites him to a banquet. And it is puzzling, isn't it? It is. To me, okay. It is puzzling to think like, why would she say, okay, I just wanted to ask you to lunch today. Like, this just seems weird. Now, here's something interesting. This has puzzled people for generations. for thousands of years, people have been puzzled. At one point, the rabbis got together, and I don't know exactly when this year was, or when they did this, but they appointed 12 rabbis, wise men, and they said, we want you to come to a conclusion and figure out why it is that she took this route in this whole process. And so they deliberated and they spent time, and these 12 guys came together and they came up with 12 different ideas. What do you know, right? 12 different reasons why Esther invited him to a banquet instead of just pleading the cause of Israel. And you know what happened? They couldn't come to agreement on any of them. And so they just left it as what it is. We can't figure it out. And you know what? We're not as smart as those guys, so we won't be able to figure it out either. But why didn't she just boldly say what she wanted to say? I feel that there are some practical reasons, certainly, but I think ultimately what happened here is that Esther was a very wise woman. She had sought the Lord for 3 days, and I believe that God had given her a pathway. God had given her a plan to follow. She knew the high stakes of the moment. I knew she prayed about this situation, and so she followed through with what she felt was a tactful approach. Now, isn't it ironic that when she said, I want you to come to a meal that I've already prepared for you, meaning it was all ready to go. She had a plan in place, and she's like, I'm going to see this plan through, and so I'm going to ask this, and she really did believe that this was the right way. I was thinking about it a little bit just in our context. I don't know if you remember how Jesus, when he told the disciples that we are like sheep among wolves in this world, right? And he told us that we need to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Have you ever heard that verse before? And the idea is that while we recognize the evil of the world that we live in, we're not necessarily always called to be super bold about everything. There needs to be wisdom and tact in the way that we share the gospel, even in the way that we live as Christians in this world. You know, this coming weekend is our global missions weekend. So next week, and I hope that you're planning on being part of our Surf City Saturday, and I hope that you'll be here next Sunday for sure as we focus on missions. But one of our missionaries that we support, and hopefully you'll be able to hear from them, but this one family in particular, in every single letter that they write to us, this is what they say. Please do not share our location. Please do not put our name online. Please do not share us on a website. And they say all of these things, and they say, please don't do that. And for us, we'd be like, well, what's their problem? Are they ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ? Are they ashamed to be Christians? Is that their problem? Don't they trust God? Of course not. None of us would say that. What are they doing? They're being wise. They're being wise. They are trying to ensure that they're able to stay in that closed country, and they're able to stay there and minister to people who might never hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so they're being wise. I have a friend of mine that I know that's in what they call now creative access countries. I think that's a great way of saying it. But it's hard to get in. And he and his family went in, and he has gone so far as to changing his complete appearance as to not stand out and to not seem like somebody from another country. And he's doing that for the purpose of sharing the gospel. And they are reaping and seeing tremendous fruit in a very, very difficult place. And I feel like that's an element of what's going on here with Esther, is that she's being wise, she's being tactful. She just doesn't come running in. She hasn't seen him for 30 days, right? And so I love to be wise for her to show up and be like, bro, like I need to do this huge thing in my life, and you need to get rid of Haman. And no, she comes in and she's tactful. She invites him. I've already prepared this, and she believed that God would give her favor. She believed, I believe this anyway, that she knew that God was going to come through. So now we come to verse number 6. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, what is your petition? He's like, hey, you came in, you're like, I know you want something. What can I do for you? And it shall be granted you. What is your request? And then he says it again, even to the half of the kingdom, it shall be performed. So here we are, the moment we've all been waiting for. And once again, all right. You know, Ahasuerus, we know he likes to go to banquets, right? We know he likes to drink. We saw that in there. And man, he's probably fattened up a little bit. He's loosened up, and he's like, all right. And he says the same thing. And if you're like me, I'm like, all right, now's the time, Esther. Like, tell him, give it to him. And by the way, I'm really hoping, don't judge me for this. I'm really hoping she's also like, and I poisoned Haman's food, right? That's what I was hoping, but it's not going to happen, okay? Hopefully she asks him, makes her plea, but that doesn't happen. Look at verse 7. Then answered Esther and said, my petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king said. Those of you that are married, you kind of know how these conversations go sometimes with your wife, right? What can I do for you? Kind of goes around, and finally you figure it out later on. Well, now she kind of puts it off again and says, I will tell you tomorrow if you come back to another banquet. And so again, this is, I believe, very humble. I believe it's very intentional. And she invites them back the next day. And we're trying to figure out why this is. Maybe the king really loves suspense, And he's just like, oh yeah, all right, okay. He just really loved, being the mystery of the whole thing. But she proposes another banquet. And the response is not recorded for us, but the king and Haman both accept. We do know that, and we'll see that here in a moment. But this is where the focus of the story turns. So we see Esther's courage here. And I want to just emphasize that once again. What a courageous woman to put herself at death's door to follow through to save her people. I mean, what a blessing that is. But secondly, we see this morning, we see Haman's conceit. Haman's conceit, that's his pride. Look at verse number 9. So Haman went out that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. We're reminded here of their tempestuous relationship. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself, and when he came home, he sent and called for his friends and Zeresh, his wife. So he left that meal with joy and gladness. What that means actually is that he left totally full of himself. He left feeling really, really, really good about himself. After all, think about it. He had been invited to a private meal with the king and the king's queen, just them. It was a huge honor, a huge privilege. I mean, they hadn't even seen each other in a month, and he got invited into that meeting. He got invited into that meal here, and he has all of this gladness, as it says, and joy. But then he sees Mordecai at the gate, the man who is the source of his rage, the man who became, again, the catalyst for the extermination of the Jews, and he gets ticked. And so what he does when he goes home, he's super mad. He calls his wife and he calls his friends, and he says, I need to vent. I need to talk to you guys a little bit. Look at verse 11. And Haman told them of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children, and all the things wherein the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and the servants of the king. Haman said, moreover, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared but myself. And tomorrow am I invited to her also with the king. And then he says in verse 13, yet all this avails me nothing, as long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Now this is so strange. He's upset. He gets his wife and his friends around, not to comfort, be a comfort to him, but to brag to them even more. It's amazing to me. He gets them together and he just starts bragging about himself. He is the picture of pride, isn't he? We would call him a me monster. You know what I'm talking about? Everything is about Haman. It doesn't matter what the situation is. He's going to find a way to talk about how good he is and how great he is. And of course, we see that same spirit today. We see so many people absorbed with their own image, with their own success, with their own influence. But the thing I want us to note here is that no matter how much you center your life around yourself, pride always craves more. I mean, Haman here had literally everything that a person could possibly want except being the king. He had everything, but there was one thing that made him upset, right? And it's Mordecai. And guess where he focuses then? All his rage and all his anger is on the one thing that he couldn't, in his mind, he needed to eliminate. And the problem is because, and the reason is, not the problem, the reason is because pride always craves more. Comparison always steals contentment. And his boasting did not bless anybody. It only fed his ego and then revealed to us his insecurity in the moment. He thought he had everything, but there was one thing that he couldn't figure out on his own, and so it just expressed itself. The book of Proverbs teaches us very well that pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. In Proverbs chapter 6, it tells us about 6 things the Lord hates. 7 are an abomination unto him. A proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaks lies. By the way, don't all of those describe Haman? Right? Do you see all of those there? Swift to shed innocent blood. He's devising wicked things. And all of us look at this list and we say, that's terrible. And then we come to the last one, he that sows discord among the brethren. Someone that sows discord among the followers of Christ. The thing I want us to notice is that even in the middle of his self-delusion and self-flattery, the desire for revenge is still eating at his heart. Even though the king had agreed to go along with his plan, and in 11 months they're going to be killed, it wasn't enough for him. He needed to be satisfied from this thorn in his flesh. And so that's why he tells them, after how great he is, he tells them that they should feel sorry for them, right? At verse 13, he said, it avails me nothing as long as I see him. I mean, all of these things that I have, it's all vanity because he is not dead. Well, his wife and his friends listen to him, and then they make a suggestion in verse 14. Then said Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends unto him, let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak unto the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king unto the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. Now, I'm not very impressed with his wife and friends, okay? First of all, they are just feeding his ego, or maybe he himself, I believe, was a completely irrational man. Don't disturb Haman. Make sure that he's all good. But they say to him, let's take care of this problem, Mordecai. Let's build a gallows 50 cubits high. Now, a cubit in Scripture is about 18 inches. It's from the elbow to the top of the middle finger on a man's arm, which you're like, my cubit is bigger than your cubit. And that is true. There was some standards that were based in there, but they say 50 cubits high. So today we'd say about 75 feet tall. Now, for reference, the center peak of this ceiling is 32 feet. So 32 feet to the center peak right there. And so more than double that. I mean, that's very high, isn't it? That's a long way, okay? So here's what I want you to say. And it's not a gallows like you and I would think of a gallows. You know, you kind of think like, pirates and gallows and all of that kind of stuff. That's not what we're talking about here. This is ancient Persian death techniques. Now, I did a deep dive into that this week, and I don't recommend it, okay? I did a deep dive into Persian death techniques. It's kind of dark, just to let you know. Pastor Levi knows. I told him every single one of them. But this was something that was very common, where they would erect a pole somewhere in a public space, and then they would, I know the word here is hang, but they would fasten a person to it. Sometimes they would drive stakes through their body and fasten them to the pole and then lift them up in the air, or they would impale the person on the top of the pole. Darius the First, who is the father of King Xerxes, who we're talking about here, when he defeated and when he overcame the empire of Babylon, he took 3,000 of their citizens and put them on poles throughout the land, 3,000 of them to send a message. And so that's what we see here. He is building a pole, a structure in which to put Mordecai to send a message that this is what happens to the person who goes against Haman. And so this was his intention, to put him up in the air in this way. This is how far the pride of Haman has taken him. William Barclay once said that pride is the ground in which all other sins grow. It is the parent from which all the other sins come. Pride and the anger that inevitably flows from it will breed in you and in me foolish decisions that we will later regret. Pride is a destroyer of our hearts and mind, and Haman is so prideful that he thinks he is untouchable. Untouchable. Sure, I'm going to build this thing and I'm going to murder this guy and put him on there. No one is going to bat an eye. It's not going to be a problem. It'll take care of the thing that bothers me the most. But as we continue this morning, Haman's about to see that no matter how prideful he is, no matter how great he thinks he is, it will not stop God's plans to save his people. And we come to our third thought this morning, is God's control. There's Esther's courage, Haman's conceit, now God's control. And we come to chapter number 6, verse number 1. On that night, the king could not sleep. And he commanded to bring the book of records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the doors. And here's what they did. They sought to lay hands on the king Ahasuerus. Now, the timing of this is impeccable. You might say strange, don't you? That the same night that Haman is building the gallows, the king can't sleep for some reason. I don't know what's going on, right? He's having insomnia. And so to help him with sleep, he calls somebody in to read the records. I'm sure that they had someone picked out in the kingdom who has the most monotone voice in the kingdom, right? They had a competition, like, I think my voice is very monotone, I don't know. They brought him in and I need you to read some records to help me fall asleep. And some of you have done that before, read to me. Or you put the TV on and you're immediately asleep, right? And so he brings him in and he hopes to bore himself. But in the middle of him reading the records of the past couple of years, he tells a story of these two men who had a desire to kill the king and how they were found out by this man, Mordecai, and Mordecai had told the king and saved his life. And at that moment, the king paid attention. And he asked them a question, verse number 3. And the king said, "What honor and dignity has been done to Mordecai for this?" So he saved my life. Like, what have we done for this guy? And then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, "There is nothing done for him." So we haven't done anything. Now this is really odd, because as vicious and as evil as the Persians were, and as quick as they were to punish, they're also very quick to reward openly and publicly. They would reward people, man, in lavish ways if they served the kingdom or they felt that they were loyal. And here he realized Mordecai has not been rewarded. Now this all seems very coincidental, doesn't it? Because if you remember back to chapter number 2, Pastor Levi spoke on this chapter. He walked us through this story at the end there of chapter 2 and how at the time Mordecai did the right thing. He spoke up. He could have just let it go. Maybe they will kill the king. Maybe things will be better for us. But he had spoken up. He did the right thing. And in the moment, it seemed like he was not recognized. In the moment, it seemed like, well, what was the point of that? Nobody even noticed that I did this. Nobody even said anything. He did the right thing, but nobody noticed. But even though he felt forgotten in the moment, God saw it and God was working behind the scenes. Again, we're seeing the hand of God in full control of the situation, and he's laying in place the details that will ultimately lead to the rescue of his people. And this is such an important thing for us to take notice of, because there are moments in life, especially in the Christian life, where you do the right thing. There are times that you serve God with a pure heart and right motives, and nobody notices. Nobody gives you a pat on the back, a warm handshake, a smile, and says, "Thank you for serving the Lord from a pure heart." No, they don't do that. And sometimes we get discouraged and we wonder, does anyone see? I got to remind you today that God sees, he knows, and here's what we also know about our God. He is faithful to reward any labor of love that is done in his name. Hebrews chapter 6, verse 10 says, "For God is not unrighteous to forget your work and labor of love, which you have showed towards his name, and that you have ministered to the saints and do minister." And so by this time, in this whole story here, it's the early morning hours. The king is not sleeping well. Haman, enraged, has been up all night. I'm sure he's not the one building it, but down there shouting at his workers, "It's got to be 75 feet tall," and they're building this thing, and he's just imagining in his mind how great it's going to be to put Mordecai on there. It's going to be awesome. I'll be able to go to lunch with a pure conscience, right? Hopefully none of you have had that thought in your mind before, right? I just got to eliminate this person and I can just move on with my life. Hopefully not, okay? Don't tell me if you did. All right, so this is the situation. So he can't sleep. And of course, this is the day Haman decides to come into work early. Look at verse 4. "And the king said, 'Who is in the court?'" So he says, "What have we done? We haven't done anything." He says, "Hey, who's out there in the court this morning?" Now it says, Haman was come into the outward court of the king's house. Why? To speak unto the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. So he's like, I'm going to get there first thing before we're talking about wars and the price of grain. Before we talk about anything else, we're going to get this thing done with Mordecai. And they came together here having like completely different things on their mind. Look at verse 5. "And the king's servant said unto him, Behold, Haman stands in the court. And the king said, Let him come in." Now this is amazing to me. At this moment, the king is obsessed with making right a wrong, and Haman is obsessed with doing wrong. He's obsessed with doing wrong that he thinks is right. It's a really unique story. But at the same time, both of them are unaware that God is in control. It doesn't matter if you're the king of the Medo-Persian Empire or you're his second-hand man who has all of the authority in the world. It doesn't matter if God's in control. And that's something we can remember when we look at our world and we see all the craziness of our society. God is in control, okay? He's in control. Look at verse 6. "So Haman came in, and the king said unto him, What shall be done unto the man whom the king delights to honor?" What a great question, right? "Hey, Haman, I got a question for you. What should I do for somebody that I really want to honor?" And Haman's like, "Well, I don't see anybody else in here, right? It's got to be me." That's what he says. Now Haman thought in his heart, "To whom would the king delight to honor more than myself?" Oh man, his pride, right? This guy, there is no one in the whole kingdom that the king likes better than me. It's for sure, it's gonna be me, right? He doesn't ask him why he came in early. He just says, hey, I wanna honor somebody. So Haman, in the moment, comes up with a great plan. Look at verse 7. It's a really great plan. And Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let the royal apparel be brought, which the king uses to wear, and the horse that the king rides upon, and the crown royal which is set upon his head. Verse 9, and let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man whom the king delights to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, then proclaim beforehand, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. What a great plan, right? He asks for things that are like nobody asked for these things. The king's horse was the king's horse. Nobody rode that horse, okay? He asked for the horse. He asked for the crown. I mean, he's like, I'm gonna play king for the day, right? King clothes, king crown, the king's horse. And not only that, I want somebody else who has authority and who everyone would know, a prince, to walk me through the town. Of course, he's thinking in his mind, me, right? And declare to everyone, this is what the king does. If you're a good subject, if you're loyal, look at what he'll do for you. You could be me, but you probably won't be. But look at this. This is amazing. So he comes up with this awesome plan. Oh, that was weird. And it's always great when your microphone is right here, right? So he constructs this amazing plan. And then the king says something that causes Haman's heart to drop, to sink into his stomach. Oh boy, verse 10. And the king said to Haman, hurry and take the apparel and the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew that sits at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. Then took Haman the apparel and the horse and arrayed Mordecai, and he brought him on horseback through the street of the city and proclaimed before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Man, God sure knows how to bring about justice, doesn't he? None of us could have drawn this up in a better way, I don't think. Because not only now is Mordecai about to be honored in public in the way that Haman designed, but Haman himself has to declare publicly the greatness and the character of him. This was public humiliation at its finest. I mean, we've all desired for someone who did us dirty to be publicly humiliated. Man, this is the ultimate right here. And I have no idea how Haman responded to this. He obviously didn't have a choice. He didn't even argue oh, sure, let me go find somebody else. No, he says, great, a prince, I think that's a great idea. You go and do it. And this is how we see God working in just an amazing way. Because Mordecai's missed out, earlier on in being honored and being noticed, because God was saving it up for this exact moment right here. This would have been a humbling experience for Haman, by the way, which is something that God will often allow and bring into the lives of those who are constantly seeking to honor themselves rather than bring honor to God. That's a really clear biblical principle that we need to take note of. We've already mentioned pride comes before the fall, right? But how many times in our lives does God allow a humbling experience simply because we have been more concerned with honoring ourselves and our reputation and what we're trying to do rather than bring honor and glory to God? I'm the first one to put my hand up. I've experienced that in my life. And I know what it is when that moment happens. And we're faced with a choice at that point. Do we humble ourselves before God and step back and say you know what, God, I'm getting a little too, the old phrase, right? A little too big for my britches, right? I'm a little too prideful. I'm thinking more about myself rather than honoring you, Lord. And we need to step back in humility. Because when those moments come, take note of it. Don't resist it. Now, Haman's going to fight against it. Haman's going to try to accelerate things here. And we see that. But there is this moment of humbling. Look at verse number 12. Afterward, Mordecai went back to the king's gate, But Haman hurried to his house mourning and with his head covered. You ever see those, like when a celebrity gets arrested, and they're like putting them in jail? They always like have a coat or a bag over their head or something. That's how I imagine him, like just running through the streets, or people around him like, who was that who was honoring Mordecai the Jew? Oh, don't worry about it. Forget it. Forget about it. He was covering his head. He's in shame. And then verse 13, he goes to his wife and his friends. Haman told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had befallen him, which is, I think, maybe a sign of humility. He probably would have been like, how was your day, honey? Like, it was all right. Like nothing really happened at all. You're home early. I know, I'm just tired. I'm going to go take a nap. No, he told them what happened, then said his wise men. So he had some people around him that were people that, would speak into his life. And Zeresh, his wife, this is what they said. They came to an agreement. If Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom you have begun to fall, you will not prevail against him, but shall surely fall before him. There's like a prophetic moment here that Haman maybe didn't see, but his wife and others around him saw. Like, it seems like you're maybe fighting a losing battle here. Maybe this group of people that you're trying to destroy are untouchable for whatever reason. They don't give any more details than that. They just start to see some cracks in his armor, some cracks in the plan. Verse 14, and while they're yet talking to him, so he goes back there, he tells them what happens. Then came the king's chamberlains and hastened to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared. Remember, there's another banquet going on. But how quickly here the story goes from his boasting to this prophetic warning. And to us, now we kind of know the end of the story maybe. Maybe you've read ahead and cheated a little bit. It seems like his downfall is imminent. But again, this is the power of our God. And this is what I want to bring it all back to this morning for us. God, who is able to work behind the scenes, to work out his will, even through wicked decisions of men. This is the providence of God. And this is the evidence that we see here in these two chapters. So what is our reflection this morning? What can we take with us today as we leave? A couple of points, just real briefly. Esther's faith brought God's favor. In answer to her fasting and to her prayer, God granted her favor before the king and gave her wisdom, I believe, to propose these two banquets. We also see in this passage that Haman's pride brought God's justice. Sometimes the enemies of God may think they are escaping his judgment, but God sees and he will execute judgment in his perfect time. Now, it may be upon his return that true justice is seen out, but even in this world, often when we look around us and we say, where is justice? Where is God in all of this? God is in control and he is paying attention. And as his people, we trust and we follow his leading. The other thing we see in this passage was that Mordecai was spared by God's grace. Think about it. On the very night that Haman was planning his destruction, God was preserving his life and ultimately will preserve his people as well. And so as we take a moment here as we close and just step back from this story, even when you cannot see the hand of God, church, he is there. And that's a recurring theme, right? We see this all throughout. Esther's courage shows us what it looks like to trust and obey when the outcome is uncertain. Haman's pride reminds us of how quickly how quickly selfishness can lead to a fall. And we're also reminded that God never sleeps. He's working. He is always working out the good of his people. And so the big takeaway for us today is just really simple. Whatever it is that you are facing right now, and I want you just to sort of just think for a moment. Whatever decision you're facing, whatever challenges, whatever fear, whatever frustration, whatever season of waiting that you're in right now, take heart. Take heart today. Because the same God who turned Esther's danger into deliverance is in control of your situation right now. So, what do? We trust his timing. His timing is always perfect. Always perfect. Secondly, walk in humility. That's a good practice, a good biblical practice. Walk in humility and then keep your faith anchored in his unseen but unfailing hand. God's got you, okay? He's got your situation and we can trust him. So this morning, that's really what it's all about. We see God at work in this unique situation here. We see all of the ways that he is making a difference. All the ways that he's working behind the scenes. And I got to tell you, you're no less important. I think I said this last week. Your life and your story is no less important than Esther and Mordecai in all of these people in here. He's the same God today, yesterday, and forever. I think I said it wrong. Yesterday, today, and forever. The song says, Jesus is the same. All may fail, but Jesus never. And then the song says this, glory to his name. Glory to his name.